And welcome, Helen. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, good to be here and good to get my tech working.
Ah, awesome. Great. Well, everybody, I have the pleasure here of speaking with Helen Kupp, who's the Director of Product Strategy at Future Forum at Slack. So, first, Helen, maybe we can just kick it off and tell us all a little bit about your background and what brings you here today.
Yeah, my background is so varied, but I've been at Slack for a little over 4 years now and started there running the strategy team and analytics team. And over the course of the last 4 years, have taken part in a lot of different initiatives, including international strategy, fundraising, our direct listing, a lot of launching things from 0 to 1. And now we're launching this new initiative at Slack called Future Forum, which is this consortium of companies really looking to reimagine work and management for more distributed teams. So a big reason for why I'm here today. This topic is very top of mind for us.
Amazing. Well, actually, can you tell us a little bit more about Future Forum? Who are the constituents? How did you guys all come together? Was this driven by COVID or was this something in the works prior?
Yeah, it's a great question. Slack has always cared a lot about this sort of move to, working more distributed, finding new ways to think about work. And so it's been an initiative that we've always wanted to launch, but COVID made everything a lot more top of mind, a lot more urgent. And so while this was baking for a while, it really sort of got us all together and said, let's just do this now. This is the right time to launch something like Future Forum. Um, and you had mentioned what are the companies that are involved? What are we all about? I'll be honest, Future Forum only just launched. So by launched, I mean we have like a public website. We had our first release of research. And that all happened in the last month and a half or so. So we're still gathering people for this consortium. We're talking to a lot of different companies. As you can imagine, a lot of them are Slack customers. A lot of them are not Slack customers as well. So stay tuned for more. We're pulling that all together now. Startup within a
That's
big company.
That's the exciting time is getting something off the ground, that 0 to 1 and figuring things out. And your timing is pretty perfect because I think we're all in this stage now where the first few months of COVID was, oh my God, what's going on? And how do I even figure out how to deal with this situation? And then it moved, for me at least, what I've been seeing in our portfolio is it moved to the phase of, okay, we're getting in the groove, we're figuring out how to modify our processes and work together and kind of create this hybrid work environment. But now people are trying to say, what does the future look like? What are we going to do in perpetuity? This has lasted a while and probably will. And so we need to be a little bit more proactive as opposed to reactive, which I think has been the past 9 months so far.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. So when we talk to customers and we talk to companies, we've seen a lot of the first 6 months just about, keeping the lights on. How do we actually make this huge pivot and make sure that everyone is supported, everyone is doing okay from a well-being standpoint? And now the real big challenges and big questions that we're hearing from a lot of different companies is, how do we operate in this new normal? And, if there is no sort of return to normal, what does work look like going forward? And how do we take advantage of being more distributed? I think there are a lot of challenges, clearly, but there's also a ton of opportunity for things like one, thinking about, diversity and inclusion. How do you hire more diverse teams, pull from different areas for talent, and how do you actually use technology, use platforms to bring more voices to the table? Whether you are, the loudest person in the room, or you're like me, deeply introverted and prefer written form, for example. I think there's a lot of opportunity to just rethink how we work together, both asynchronously and synchronously, to take advantage of, different personalities, different working types, et cetera.
It's interesting you bring up that last piece because this is completely personally biased, but I'm extremely extroverted. I'm the opposite. And I feel like I've always thrived in in-person work and being physically present and around the table. And I'm finding it's a lot harder for me on remote calls and Zoom conferences and things like that to feel comfortable and know when to step in, when to not tug over people, things like that. So I think it's a calibration exercise for all types of people. But I think it's a good time to be having these conversations and making sure that
Yeah.
voices are heard and things like that. Well, you
Yeah.
mentioned
You'd be surprised, actually, it's not just extroverts. So one of the things that we found in our research was, you would think that like, oh, introverts are living their best lives right now over
yeah,
Zoom and asynchronous work. But everyone's struggling with that sense of belonging. And, you know, everyone has sort of said productivity has been about the same, if not a little bit better now that we're working from home, reducing the commute and all that. But sense of belonging continues to be quite challenging for all of us. And I think it's partially because of COVID and not even being able to go see family and friends that are nearby, but partially just we are recalibrating, like you said, how we connect with each other in this more sort of two-dimensional digital format.
yeah, absolutely. Well, you touched on a little bit of the research, but you guys did publish some really interesting research recently. And it seemed like you were digging really deeply into five key elements of work, which were around productivity, work-life balance, managing work-related stress and anxiety, which I know is a huge one, sense of belonging, and satisfaction with working arrangement. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about any of the findings that were super interesting or different kind of components of those five areas of work.
Yeah, I mentioned the belonging one. That one was a really big piece of the finding. If you think about, what we did was we compared and asked people about how, working in the office compares to working from home now. And across all of those dimensions, except for belonging, we actually saw that working from home is better. So work-life balance is a really easy one, right? We all are feeling kind of the benefits of saving those like 2 hours of commute time. You have a little bit more time at home with family. I have a 10-month-old baby, and so it's been really amazing to actually get to see him grow up and reach milestones each step of the way. Productivity, like I said, not in some ways surprising, in some ways not surprising. We're all kind of finding that productivity has been roughly about equal before and after, the work from home shift. But I think stress and anxiety, belonging, those are kind of big things. I think if you unpack the research, the more important thing that we're finding is that this is not, universal for everyone. I think different populations of people are feeling different challenges. And that kind of speaks to how much harder the manager job is in kind of the remote world and for distributed teams. For example, obvious or not obvious, US women are struggling a lot more with things like productivity, work-life balance, and all of that, more so than even just men with kids, and more
Shocking.
so than I know, and more so than like women outside of the U.S. because of what we lack in infrastructure. And so if you think about from a manager's perspective, you now have all that we're dealing with in the macro environment in terms of systemic racism, things that are happening in terms of politics, and also childcare that some of your employees are dealing with. Lots of different types of issues, lots of different struggles across all of those dimensions that people are working through. And so how do you as a manager show up and make space for your employees to navigate that across a very diverse team, I think is a big challenge. So our research sort of goes into more depth around different populations, all of those different aspects, and tries to highlight those pockets of differences and challenges. But I think that the key message is just the challenges are not universal, and we're all struggling with something different. And I think really trying to find the right ways to make space for everyone to navigate, their own sort of challenges, and how you can best support that is a big challenge and big question for all of us.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting too. I think people are hopefully starting to approach other humans, not only with positive intent, but also just knowing that we're all dealing with our own things right now. And it's hard to distance yourself, work and personal life and things like that. And just knowing that whatever is going on the other side, you just aren't privy to that information. And people, I think, are just becoming much more human to each other. I mean, we're getting to see inside people's houses, we're getting to see people's kids and dogs and family members. I think there's something really beautiful about us all humanizing each other and feeling a little bit more empathy, I guess, is at least what I've been feeling.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with someone and talking about vulnerability and the importance of leaders in showing vulnerability first and taking that first step. And in some ways, right, belonging is hard because we're now two-dimensional instead of three-dimensional. But in other ways, this new format sort of enables us to think about, connecting and vulnerability in a different way. So one of those ways is exactly that. Like, you get a window into my home. You can see the guitars that my husband likes to collect. There's a little too many right now, and we. If you called at a very different time, you would hear kind of baby screaming in the background. We get to know each other and our lives in a very different way. And that's, that's sort of a key theme to what I'm finding with conversations about remote work in general is don't just try to copy what you used to do, right? How you used to connect with people or how you used to do things, run meetings, etc. But think about new opportunities for doing things differently. How can you connect in different ways? How can you run meetings differently that actually utilizes the advantages of being a distributed team, about being digital first, asynchronous, etc. All of those things you can actually, there's a lot of really great benefits to that. As long as you let go of the traditional, we have to be in a room to have this meeting, for example. A great way that we're doing it is, we're finding ways to actually send things in advance so that people can brainstorm, brainwrite together, add thoughts into a document, and then when we actually jump into a meeting, we're not, rehashing the same context, but we're reading through each other's initial thinking and then coming up with, additional discussion points, additional ideas from there on, rather than, waiting for organic discussion to happen in the meeting itself. So there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of rethink what old work processes.
Yeah, it's interesting on that topic, and I think that really does feel like a best practice in all the research I've done on teams who've been remote first for years or decades, all the way to people who are more new at this. There's that old saying of every happy family is happy in a different way, but every unhappy family is unhappy, and this is all unhappy in a similar way. Similarly, I'm finding a dynamic among remote first teams, and that they all have different tool sets, different processes, different culture, but 100% of them put a huge precedent on documentation and collaborative documentation. And I think to your point around sending things out before so that people can, understand and digest and have that time to comment on your thinking and, whatever the work is, then you can better utilize the together time. I actually, my you probably wouldn't need this, but I have been playing around over the weekends with the Google Calendar and Google and Gmail APIs because I have this vision for a bot that if there are more than two people from your own company on any meeting, right after the meeting, it sends everyone a really quick notification. And all it says is this meeting should have been an email, thumbs up or thumbs down. And it, I think, just gets to the point of
I
we
love
haven't,
that.
right? I mean, it gets at the point where we haven't adapted. We think that we're just porting things one to one of analog to digital. And that's not
Yep.
the best way to make people feel like they're getting, work done, feeling like they're belonging and feeling like they're heard. And so I think you're spot on in terms of recreating new processes.
Yeah,
On the
I think you have to. I think you have to if you're going to move into more distributed work. Um, Even if you are, for example, if you're moving to a more written culture as well, there are snowball effects to that, right? So another thing is you can't just have your like full day of meetings if you're going to write things down and spend time actually like thinking ahead of the next meeting, jotting down your ideas. So you actually have to start to rethink, well, okay, how do I block out, the 2 to 3 hours of focus time so that I can write, so I can think deeply, so that I can provide that feedback in advance for when we actually get together. And so there's these like snowball effects of those decisions. And the goal is to just make that consistent so that you're able to make space to change those processes. It's like building a new habit, to be honest. It's like getting to the gym and working out. It's hard, and you sort of like revert back to old habits when you are stressed out and you're like, I'm going to set a meeting because we have to get this done. We have to get people in the same room together. Otherwise, like, we'll never come to a decision. But I mean, just go back and think about like when you had a large meeting with tons of people for 30 minutes. Did you actually make a decision, or is there a better way to do that? And can you either do that in email, in channel, or through a written document where you can highlight sort of key assumptions, have people comment on it, figure out who the decision maker is, and like make a call.
I love the concept of thinking about it, like reframing it as breaking bad habits and creating new habits. I think that really resonates. One area in your research that you touched on that didn't improve or remain at least kind of neutral in working remotely is a sense of belonging. And curious to hear what you've seen people do to try to ameliorate that, whether people are, spending more time with close-knit community and friends and family where they live physically, or how people are adapting to finding belonging.
Yeah, we don't have good answers for that. I think every team approaches this differently, and we're all still trying to find ways to connect with each other and build relationships while we're all remote. There are a couple interesting things that we're finding. One is, there are clear things that you can do within your team, like within your first team, to think about, how do you utilize times that where you are meeting to be a little bit more informal, to be a little bit more social, to ask about each other, to your point around, seeing each other more as human, trying to learn more about their lives behind the scenes, behind the work. What are they struggling with? What are they dealing with? The other thing that we're finding is, traditionally, people sort of find belonging with proximity. So you're sitting next to people in a pod, you're on the same floor, and going to the kitchen and bumping into people. That doesn't exist in a distributed team, right? And so there's actually a rising importance of community groups like ERGs within your organization, where that's sort of your second community. You have your first team of people that you work really closely with, and then ERGs are sort of people who you have a common and shared experience, and are able to connect on topics that are outside of your day-to-day projects. And so those become a lot more important when you're trying to foster connectedness and belonging within an organization more broadly. And we have that. Pregnancy support channel and motherhood channel has been so important to me as a new mom, and just being able to, we have this we have a reminder that gets sent every Thursday morning, that just says like, hey, post a Giphy of how you're feeling this week, and it's this great thread of just random Giphies from like, I feel powerful, to like exhausted, to, just really funny stuff that every mom kind of resonates with. And so that's like a really nice, lighthearted way to, connect with people who are going through a shared experience with you.
Yeah, and building those little rituals and little internal cultures and shared experiences. That's very cool. One thing that is interesting is that, Slack is obviously a tool for work. I think the tagline is even where work happens. Yet so many communities that have nothing to do with work have adopted Slack as the channel and forum to bring people together. Obviously, it's a great communication mechanism. Have you seen any trends or changes during COVID because people who might have had a community based off proximity, or like a running club or a knitting club, have you seen more people adopting Slack for those type of use cases?
It's a good question. I haven't dug into that specifically in terms of like use cases beyond work. I will say that I'm seeing anecdotally more people use Slack for that like belonging and connectedness layer, right?
Yeah.
The importance of social channels and using them as ways to connect on topics from cats to dogs to cooking, photography, etc. And that as your lifeline to sort of non-work related, topics and community within the employee base. That has definitely risen and has become a lot more popular, especially now in COVID.
Yeah. One other area that I think people tend to struggle with is how to stay in sync while async. And I know, Slack obviously really helps enable both synchronous and asynchronous work in different ways. But I know you have a lot of thoughts on how people should be working either synchronously or asynchronously. So would love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the reason I think I tout the, we have to work asynchronously mantra is we've all been talking about distributed work and flex spaces, but flex spaces is not the same as like flex hours, right? Flexibility
Totally.
and where you work is not the same as like flexibility within your day, which a lot more of us need because of COVID, childcare, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I think really making asynchronous work takes structure, actually, believe it or not, structure for flexibility, and commitment across the team to set, new norms and expectations of how you work together as a team. So, for example, on our team, how we make asynchronous work is we've actually decided on a couple of hours within the day that we will be synchronous, meaning, we're not in a meeting together, but we are around and available for, quick DMs or a quick like, video chat if we need to just hash things out in real time. And then, outside of that, we sort of decide our own like focus blocks and focus hours for asynchronous work. And to actually, be productive during those times. As a team, we have to be really, really clear on roles and responsibilities, goals and priorities. So what are the things that you're owning? When do we need this by? And when are we going to all sync on it the next time? So having clarity on expectations and roles, I think makes it really, really becomes really important when you're doing, asynchronous work versus just all kind of being in the office together at the same time and changing things on the fly. But I think it is, extremely valuable to do those things regardless if you're asynchronous or synchronous.
Yeah.
It's something that we sort of leaned on the office as a crutch for a very long time to, kind of not do that as rigorously, set clear priorities, set clear goals. These are really obvious, like management related things that are basics, but it becomes even more important in distributed teams and in asynchronous working style.
And how do you think about pairing that, so being as productive and in sync in, an asynchronous style with kind of that creativity and innovation that comes from the serendipitous interactions with your colleagues of somebody going and grabbing you into a room and whiteboarding or having a lunchtime conversation with somebody that sparks a new thing like future form or something. How do you balance that?
Oh, the water cooler myth.
Yeah.
The water cooler myth, I believe that it's total bullshit. It's such a myth. We believe that, we have these moments where we go into the kitchen, we're grabbing coffee, and we meet someone who's not on our team, and all of a sudden we have this brilliant idea connecting the dots. When in reality, we do a lot of that. It's social and it's good for us, but those sort of like innovative ideas may become, less than 1% of the time. And so I don't believe that we should leave creativity and innovation to luck, which is a lot of what that is. I think that there are ways that you can reimagine how to be innovative and how to be creative for distributed teams where you can use the same benefits. So, for example, will use a tool like Mural or Miro or Jamboard to sort of provide a framework for like what are we brainstorming, how are we thinking about this problem, and then separately actually generating ideas on our own and then bringing those to the table. And actually research shows that that will generate better ideas because you're bringing in sort of diverse perspectives than what we traditionally do, which is go into a room and like whiteboard together. It's research has shown that like doing that, you actually get more groupthink because if you're doing that live, you're sort of iterating on the idea that you just heard. You're sort of really kind of building alignment around the same set of things rather than coming to the table with something very, very different. And so I actually do think that the remote, format can, and especially with structure and a way to sort of facilitate, getting ideas, bringing it together, and finding ways to narrow the funnel once you are able to bring those ideas together, will actually spark more innovation and creativity than, relying on luck. You just have to make space for, for play, for thinking, for brainstorming, for doing that kind of work. But we had to do that in the past too. It's better to make space for it and do planning rather than, relying on that less than 1% chance of the brilliant next idea that will happen.
I think that's a really interesting concept and thought, and I think you're really correct in that you immediately get the group think when you bring people together, and also you play to certain, whether it's people who are introverted that don't want to speak up and would rather not stir the pot, or just getting over that fear factor, I guess. But I can imagine that fear factor still exists when you're sending over something that is, you're sending over your ideas or thoughts without seeing other people's too. And so are there things you've seen that help like, help with that piece of not having that fear of, well, what if this is really bad? What if everyone else's is different?
Oh, yeah, that one's hard. I think you have to, it really just depends on like making sure that your team is building that psychological safety. It's an overused term, but it's very true, right? Like as a team, you should not, be overly critical of stupid ideas because we all have them. Like many of the ideas will sound stupid at first. And if you create a process where you are criticizing once the ideas are put forth, then people will be, more and more scared to. But if you use that as a way to say, oh, great, these are like very different ideas, use the yes and format. How do we build on that? How do we mesh these two ideas together? You start to build those cycles of feedback that show that that's okay to do. That's okay to bring something very, very different. Often like maybe even reward the like wildly different ideas. We do that as a team. I think we celebrate the like, wow, that came out of left field. That's like, I hadn't thought about that. That's pretty awesome. As a way to just, make sure that we're surfacing those because that's what you want, right? For innovative ideas, like you want the different stuff.
Amazing. Well, Helen, this has been awesome. I am going to post the link right now to Future Forum, but if people want to learn more, get in touch, where should they go?
Learn more. The website is exactly the place to learn more and get in touch. We have our email there. It's futureforum.com. It has our manifesto, our research, and soon enough, we'll have a lot more about our events and additional blog posts and research that we'll be posting.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Helen, and thank you for sharing a bunch of stuff about how people can win in the new normal.
Thanks for having me, Elaine.
Awesome. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.